Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
So, okay, let's move to David's topic, which is a recent Yelp consumer survey about ads on the brain, about reviews, trust, and credibility. So, David, tell us what that survey said.
That's right. So this was a sponsored survey from Yelp. Important to note that pretty much everything Yelp touts is actually sponsored by them, including their focus on the user research, where they actually sponsored the Harvard researchers to kind of do that consumer survey. Same kind of deal here. They hired a firm, I think, out of the UK to survey 1,500 consumers about their preferences as they relate to reviews. And they found, not necessarily a surprising takeaway, 59% of consumers preferred medium length reviews between 16 and 50 words. 24% of consumers preferred short reviews, 15 words or less. And only 14% of consumers preferred long reviews, 51 words or longer. Almost no one likes only star ratings. So I think the motivation here on Yelp's part was to say, hey, look, our reviews are better. Google's showing way too many reviews that are star ratings only, many of which come from local guides, which you'll talk about next, Greg. But that our reviews are better. It's a better user experience than what Google is providing. And I think the survey for me just brought up a bunch of unanswered questions, which are, what is the word distribution of Yelp's reviews, both unfiltered reviews. So the reviews that show, in my experience, tend to be longer than 50 words. The reviews that Yelp filters tend to actually be much closer to the under 15 or 16 to 30 words. So to my mind, Yelp is actually showing reviews that 86% of consumers don't want to read, and they're filtering reviews that 86% of consumers do want to read. And then there's this, they're trying to position Google as showing a whole bunch of reviews with only star ratings. And in my experience using Google, that's not typically what shows up front and center on the business profile. In fact, Google goes to great lengths to show snippets from longer form reviews. Typically, users are not leaving tomes on Google the way that they are on Yelp. I would guess that the vast majority of Google reviews actually fit in that 59% bucket that the majority of consumers prefer. So I'd like to see a follow-up to this study where Yelp actually reveals their own review word count information and how well it aligns with this, because I think they're trying to tell a story that isn't true of their own product and certainly doesn't seem to be true of Google's product.
Yeah, I do think that people want, I think what people ultimately want is sort of trustworthy reviews, which the text does provide some validation that this is a real human being as opposed to just the star ratings. I mean, years ago, Google had lots and lots of star ratings and no
Yes.
text, and that has changed dramatically over time, obviously. And so I think, and in some of the research that I did at Uberall, Google is number one, Yelp is number two, but it's a big gap. 70% of people, rely on Google as their primary review source, and then Yelp is a much lower number. I mean, so I think Google has definitely lapped Yelp a couple of times, and their review volume is something like 10x probably what Yelp has. So,
and the survey also doesn't take into account the major shift that Mike has noted in his now PDF available at Near Media on Apple Maps around how Apple is collecting structured information that consumers are clearly going to find valuable, but not in a right. Traditional sort of expositional review, right? So that doesn't even the survey didn't even attempt to say, hey, do you prefer this or this to consumers?
And how can people get that PDF, David?
Well, if you subscribe to Near Media at nearmedia.co/subscribe, you'll receive a link in your inbox to the PDF of Mike's really detailed and I think the most detailed and the most informational review of actionable information review of the Apple Maps changes over the last year or so.
Yes, and Mike, you wanted to say something before we got into self-promotion mode there.
Well, I want to say in Yelp's credit, even though this is a sponsored survey, they highlighted the fact that it was a sponsored survey. Google, on the other hand, often funds various groups, never
That's
mentions the funding, and the press that comes out of that is never annotated as funded by Google. So from a transparency point of view, I'd much rather know who's funding this than not. And in Google's case, God, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on the opposite of that. So, we live in a capitalist society, so virtually everything
A fair point.
we see has an axe to grind financially. It's nice to know who's grinding it. That's all.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.